Howdy doody buckaroonies, and welcome back. Much like a sequel to the 2002 cinematic classic Cadet Kelly, today's video is long overdue. Let's talk about VCV Rack, the amazingly powerful, amazingly free, and amazingly open source modular synthesizer. VCV Time. Welcome to a beginner's guide to VCV Rack. First off, if you don't have VCV Rack, you can download it with the link down in the description below. Don't worry, I'll wait. VCV Rack is a modular synthesizer, and modular synths are as simple or as complicated as you want to make them. So with that in mind, we're not going to be covering every possible thing you can do in VCV Rack because that would be insane. And the real question is, well, what do you want it to do? So we're going to be covering a few key concepts in this video to get you started with the wacky, wild world of modular. First off, we're going to talk about getting audio and MIDI in and out of VCV Rack. You could control it with your favorite MIDI controller, you could use it as an audio effect on your vocals or a guitar, and you could even use it to control your favorite hardware synths or even other plugins. After that, we're going to take a look at building your first basic patch in VCV Rack, taking this blank cabinet of nothing and turning it into a big spaghetti noodle mess of sonic glory. After that, we're going to talk about how to make it polyphonic, a couple of cool modules I think you should check out, how to use it in your DAW, and then closing things off, 3 fast patch ideas you can use to start exploring the world of modular and make your own cool patches. So if you want to navigate to any of those sections in this video, you can use the timestamps down below. First up, audio in and out of VCV Rack. I've already got this done here with the Audio 8 module, because if I delete it, I have to start over and change the sample rate, and whenever I change my sample rate with this module, VCV Rack crashes, so I guess that's the price of open source. But all you need to do is right click or use the Enter key, go to the VCV folder and find the Audio 8 or Audio 16 modules. To add a module, we can just click and drag it in, but I'm not going to do that because I've already got that set up. So from here, we select our driver type, we select our audio driver. In this case, it's going to be my Arturia audio fuse. We could set our sample rate and then finally the buffer size. To get audio out of VCV Rack, we could just add something like a quick oscillator here. So we can grab VCO2, and then I'm gonna right click and grab just a quick amplifier. We'll talk about all this in a minute. I'm just gonna use this so I can mute it. We'll run this in and out. I'm gonna turn this all the way down, run the output to audio 1 and audio 2. So we'll grab 2 and wire it backwards. This way it's gonna go to my left and right speakers, which are output 1 and 2 on my interface. So now if we turn this up, congratulations, we have sound. As for getting sound into VCV Rack, that would be the from device down here. So input 1 would be my microphone, input 2 would be the second input, and so on as respective to your interface. So if I was running my guitar into VCV Rack, I could just grab this output and wire it into something like a filter or delay, and then wire that out to the device, and we're done. Let's talk about MIDI in and out. Let's right click, we're in the VCV folder, so we're gonna grab the MIDI CV module here. So we'll drag this in. We're gonna use Windows MIDI. I'm gonna find my device. In this case, it's my Arturia MIDI In 0 from my audio fuse. We can use all channels or select a specific channel, and we get all of the MIDI data from that device to feed into VCV Rack.
But Cameron, what about getting MIDI out of VCV Rack?
You might ask. Well, don't worry, I got you. For that, we can right click and go to the CV MIDI module here in the VCV folder, and now we can send this all out to a device. Again, we'll select our device type, we'll select the specific device, in this case Arturia MIDI Out 1, and then we can select the specific channel. Congratulations, you now understand the basics of getting audio and MIDI in and out of VCV Rack. So let's make this thing do something. Building your first patch in VCV Rack doesn't really have to be that complicated. We're gonna start things off with something nice and easy. If we think about a synthesizer like Vital, it's built with a couple of basic components. First off, we have oscillators which produce the sound. Then we have filters which subtract something from that sound with a low pass, high pass, band pass, or whatever. Then we have an amplifier or the output volume, and finally some envelopes to control the level of the amplifier over time and maybe control something like the filter. That is really the key lesson in modular synthesis, because every time you build a modular patch, you're essentially building your own instrument from the ground up, which is kind of cool, right? So let's build a synthesizer. Let's right click, again in the VCV folder, we're gonna grab a VCO or an oscillator, which is gonna be our sound source, a VCF, which is going to be our filter, which is gonna subtract from that. Right click again, let's grab the VCA2, which is gonna be our amplifier, And finally, let's go in and get an ADSR, which is going to be our envelope, which we can in turn use to control the amplifier. Now, let's get this bad boy wired up. First off, we need to tell the VCO or oscillator what pitch to play. To do that, we're gonna grab the volts per octave output here of the MIDI device. Volts per octave is how frequency is measured in the world of modular synthesis, and this can get kind of complicated, but for the sake of keeping things pretty basic, we're not gonna dive too much into the world of CV here. To wire this up, we'll take the volts per octave from the device and wire that to the volts per octave input of the oscillator. Next step, we need to feed the oscillator into the filter. In this case, down on the bottom, let's grab the saw wave output and we'll wire that to the input of the VCF or the voltage controlled filter. Now we can output either the low pass filter or the high pass filter. Let's go with the low pass filter because that's gonna be a bit easier just to hear and a bit more standard. So do we wire this to the ADSR? No, this actually goes directly into the amplifier over here. If we wire the output of the amplifier to the device,
oh no,
it's permanently gonna play sound forever. So we need to control the level of the amplifier over time. And how we're gonna do that is with the envelope here. Going back to the MIDI CV module, we have another thing called gate. A gate message is when a note is on and when it goes off. So a gate is open as long as a note is pressed and it closes immediately after you let the note go. So we'll take the gate output from the device and feed that to the gate input of the ADSR or envelope. Now we'll feed the output of the envelope to the exponential or linear, but most of the time exponential is the safer bet, input of the VCA. Now we can wire the output to the device and we hear nothing. Let's wire output 2 as well so we get this in both the left and right speaker. And now we can shape the level of volume over time when a gate signal is received. So let's drop the attack down to 0. Let's maybe increase the decay, drop the sustain down a bit, and maybe add a bit of release. So we can hold a note down, and we're done. Let's make the attack a bit longer. Let's increase the sustain and release. And you've successfully built your first patch. Let's move back to the filter and start talking a little bit about CV, which is the foundational element of all things in the world of modular. On the VCF here, we have the frequency knob, and we can use this to open and close the frequency of the filter. And we have other controls you would expect, like filter drive and filter resonance. So let's add a bit of resonance and create just a nice resonant saw sweepy thing. Let's say you want to move the frequency, but obviously playing a note and having to click and drag your mouse on the frequency knob would be obnoxious and nobody wants to do that. That's where CV comes in. CV, or control voltage, is the foundational element of all things modular, and it comes in all shapes and sizes. So for the sake of keeping things simple here, we're just gonna stick to an LFO. Let's right click, grab the LFO1 from the VCV library here, and we'll take the triangle wave output and feed that to the frequency input of the filter. If we play a note, you would probably expect now that the filter is going to open and close because of the triangle wave, right? Well, let's test it. Nothing happens. Why is that? Because we need to increase the frequency CV control here of the VCF. This can be positive or negative. So let's hold down a note and start increasing that, and we should hear the triangle wave move the filter cutoff up and down. Obviously, we could change the frequency of the LFO. We could change it to be unipolar or bipolar. And all sorts of other fun stuff that I will leave you to explore. With that, congratulations, you've now built your first synthesizer with your own 2 jazz hands. Great. Let's talk about making it polyphonic, because if we delete that and give this a play, you might notice, oh no, I can only play one note at a time. So how do we make this into a polyphonic synthesizer? Every module in VCV Rack is a little bit different, and not all of them support polyphony, but most of the time it's as simple as going to your source and then right-clicking and setting the number of polyphony channels. In this case, we'll go for maybe about 4. Usually between 4 and 8 is a safe bet. The more voices of polyphony, obviously the more CPU intensive things can get, and if you have a very big complicated patch, that can get pretty out of hand pretty quickly. So for this instance, let's just stick with 4. It's a nice safe number. Now that we've set that up, let's turn the amplifier down and we can see that all the cables are a little bit thicker now because polyphony be thick, I guess, and we can play a chord now up to 4 notes. And we have made a polyphonic synthesizer in VCV Rack. The next big question VCV beginners might have is, what module should I download? And I can't really answer this question for you because there are literally thousands of modules, most of them entirely free, and it really comes down to, well, what do you want to do with your modular synth? But there are a few cool collections that I think you should know about. First up, Audible Instruments, definitely worth checking out. It's a recreation of some of the most popular mutable instruments modules, including clouds, so that's pretty sick. And if you've ever wanted to play with some of these modules that you've probably heard a million times, you can actually do it for the introductory price of exactly $0, and that's pretty awesome. Next up, Chow DSP. The maker of Chow Tape and Chow Matrix and a couple of other really cool free plugins actually has a couple of modules for VCV Rack. So if you're into Chow Tape and some of the other Chow plugins, definitely check out Chow DSP inside of VCV Rack. If you're looking for some really cool sequencers and some of my favorite sequencers in all of VCV Rack, Jeremy Wentworth makes some of the coolest modules that are my absolute favorites and the things that keep me coming back to VCV Rack the most, especially when it comes to using VCV with my favorite hardware synthesizers. Jeremy Wentworth, in case you didn't know, is also the only person to slam a revolving door twice while counting backwards from infinity. Surge for Rack is a collection of VCV Rack modules from the fine people over at the Surge Synth team, and this includes a pretty ridiculous set of effects, including oscillators, wavetable oscillators, effects, and pretty much everything else you could possibly need to start expanding the world of VCV Rack. These are also some really handy utility modules, so they're certainly worth knowing about. The Valley modules for VCV Rack are definitely worth checking out, Plateau being one of the more highly regarded reverb modules, so if you're looking for a super nice reverb, definitely check that one out, but there's also a good FM Synth and a couple other really useful modules inside of the Valley module collection. Finally, one more collection you should know about is from Volt. Volt makes some really awesome oscillators and filters that just sound phenomenal. These are absolutely worth checking out, and I think are some of the better sounding oscillators and filters inside of VCV, and Volt even makes some real hardware, so that's pretty awesome. You can actually get some of the Volt hardware right inside of VCV, much like the mutable instrument stuff, and start exploring it for free. If you're a more experienced VCV user and you know some other really awesome modules that people should check out, definitely leave those down in the comments below. The next big question, and probably one of the most common questions, how do I use VCV Rack in the DAW? Now, at the time of making this video, VCV Rack 2 has not been released, but there will be a paid version of VCV Rack 2 that does work as a VST plugin. In the meantime, though, you'll need to use the VCV bridge, and warning, here there be dragons. The VCV bridge is not super stable and sometimes just doesn't work at all. Personally, I had a really hard time ever getting it to work at all inside of Cubase, but Bitwig, for the most part, seems to be pretty stable with it. Your mileage may vary. To use VCV Rack in the DAW, what we can do is add an instrument track in the case of Bitwig, and we'll go to VCV bridge here. Now we can select the port. We can see that this says port number 1. So back in VCV Rack, we're gonna need to set this to go to the port of bridge here. Back in VCV on the Audio 8 module, rather than an ASIO driver, we're gonna send this to the bridge, and fingers crossed this isn't gonna crash when I do it. Cool. Let's set this to our device, which is gonna be port 1. Looks like that is all good. Let's hop back into the DAW and test it out. We're back in the DAW, the sun is shining, let's play a couple notes. And we've got VCV Rack running into the DAW. Just to test it out, let's add some Valhalla Supermassive to it because Supermassive is awesome. Let's find a nice big ol' reverb of some kind and give it a play. And we have successfully wired VCV Rack into the DAW. Finally, to close this video off, let's talk about 3 super fast patch ideas you can use to start exploring the wacky wild world of VCV Rack. First up, building a subtractive synthesizer. And guess what, friend? You already did it. This is a basic subtractive synthesizer, and there are a lot of ways that you can expand on it. First up, let's maybe add a filter envelope. So to do that, we're gonna copy and paste this envelope. We'll just paste it up here, move the filter over a little bit and drop this down. So now we're gonna need to wire the gate to the gate here, and we'll set the output to the frequency input of the filter. Let's increase the CV all the way, maybe. Do something right about like that, should be good. So let's add a nice filter envelope of some kind. We'll do something like that, maybe a little bit of a sweep to it. And now we've got a subtractive synth with a filter envelope as well. Sick, let's maybe add some delay and reverb. To add a quick reverb and delay, let's right click and make sure the filters are reset. Let's go to delay and grab maybe just the stock VCV delay. That's a nice safe module to try out here. Let's wire the output to the input bone here and then the output to the device output. Now we can give this a play. For some reason that doesn't seem to be working exactly as you would think, maybe because it's not polyphonic. Let's set this back to mono. And we've got a basic delay effect. Now let's add a reverb. Of course, we're gonna grab the lovely plateau here from Valley. Let's place that right here. This actually has stereo in, so we'll do left and right, and then left output to 1, right output to 2. And let's just mess with this teensy bit. Maybe something sort of about like that. Sweet, and we have built our first subtractive synth patch with a added delay and reverb. Let's maybe make this a bit more woozy with some long attack or something along those lines. Nice. Going back to our basic subtractive setup here, let's turn this quickly into an FM synthesizer. So I'm just gonna delete these two modules. We're no longer gonna need them. I'm gonna output the sine wave to the input of the VCA, and right now we've just got a super basic sine wave. Nothing too interesting, but we could quickly turn this into an FM synthesizer. An FM synthesizer is made up of what's known as operators, and operators are made up of an oscillator, an amplifier, and an envelope traditionally. So we'll just copy this down. I'm gonna hit copy and paste, copy and paste, and copy and paste. So we've got two separate synthesizers here, but instead of routing them both out, we're gonna route this lower level into the upper level to create FM. To do that, we're gonna get volts per octave, grab that from the MIDI CV module, we're gonna get the gate from the MIDI CV module, and then we're gonna wire this up. So the sine wave is gonna go to the input of the amplifier, the output of the ADSR is gonna go to the exponential input of this VCA, and then the output of this VCA is gonna go to the FM input of this upper layers oscillator. Now we can hold a note and press it and start increasing the FM CV of that top oscillator, and we've got an FM synth. We could do something like increasing the frequency. We could control the amplifier of the lower level with a different envelope shape to create some different FM-y stuff. Let's maybe control click to reset that. And we've built a super basic FM synth. Experimenting with things like setting these oscillators to digital mode, as well as changing them from hard to soft, can change the overall timbre of the FM. And there's a lot of ways you could just start to experiment with this. We could maybe do something like that and totally change the sound of this. And you could expand with this as much as you want by adding more operators. A little bit of life advice though, if you're looking for a better FM synth module, Dexter from Valley is the way to go. It's a really good FM synth module with 4 operators. You get multiplications of the frequency, different algorithms, coarse tuning, fine tuning, different waves, different shapes, different level controls, and everything you need to build a really good FM patch right inside of one module. At this point, it's probably worth mentioning as well that every module in VCV Rack typically has pretty good documentation. Some have really bad documentation and some seem to lack it altogether, so your mileage may vary, but if you're stuck and wondering how a different module might work or play into your patch, you can check out the documentation for it on the website and get some ideas of how to use it. Finally, what kind of monster would I be if I didn't teach you to make a basic generative synth patch? Because playing your own synthesizers is for chumps. So instead of us having to sit here poking notes like a useless meatbag, we can actually create something to let VCV Rack generate infinite new ideas for us. To make a basic generative synth patch, we'll right click and we're gonna grab the LFO module because we're gonna use that to generate a clock, because that's gonna be very important here in a minute. To generate a basic clock, the easiest way to do it is to use an LFO and output a square wave because it's on and off and on and off on a regular basis, so it's pretty useful as a super basic clock. Now, this is all well and good, but nothing is happening yet because we need our fancy pants generative tool. Let's right click, reset these filters. We'll go down to JW modules because Jeremy Wentworth is the man. Let's grab the Note Sequencer 16 here. What we'll do is output the square wave into the clock input, and we'll see that this is gonna start jumping and jumping and jumping. Let's increase the speed with the frequency, and I think you get the idea. To generate a bunch of random note stuff, we'll hit random here, and we've generated something new. So instead of using the MIDI CV, we're actually gonna grab all this information from Note Sequencer 16 here. So we'll use the volts per octave out to send pitch to the oscillator and the gate output to send the gate to the ADSR. And we could randomize for random new infinite ideas. So how cool is that? But what's even cooler, we could even send this to actual hardware. So let's give that a shot and send this generative patch to my modal Cobalt behind me here. To do that, we're gonna right click, search for CV, and grab that CV to MIDI module we talked about earlier, which is gonna be right here. And now we can just move a couple quick connections around. So we're gonna send the volts per octave to the volts per octave input of the CV MIDI and the gate to the gate input of the CV MIDI. I'm gonna set this to be my Arturia MIDI out, and now it's gonna be sending that out to the Cobalt 8. My Cobalt is currently plugged in to 3 and 4 on my interface, so if I wire 3 and 4 to 1 and 2, VCV Rack is now controlling that synth behind me there. What's even cooler though, is we could even pipe this through our favorite modules here. So let's take output 3, we'll just do this mono to keep things simple. We're gonna feed that through that delay, the delay into the reverb, and now we've got these modules in VCV providing effects to our hardware synth. So let's feed that out. Ta-da! Look, Mom, no hands. VCV Rack is amazing, it's free, and it's entirely open source, and you can go check it out right now to get started in the world of modular synthesis, and I think it's awesome. It's driven by a super passionate community of extremely talented and very cool people, and it has thousands and thousands of free modules you can check out to start playing with and explore all sorts of weird and interesting ideas, and it really just keeps getting better and better over time. There are quite a few paid modules available for VCV Rack. Of course, as always, I would encourage you to buy modules that you think are worthwhile to help support the developers, as well as buy the paid version of VCV Rack when it does come out to help support the developers of VCV Rack. As always in these types of videos, a huge, infinitely huge thank you to the developers of VCV Rack, the developers of the modules, and the community surrounding it for making tools like this free, open source, and accessible to everyone to start creating with. That is amazing, and I always love to see that kind of stuff. So, from the bottom of my buckaroony heart, thank you. Hopefully this video gives you a bit of inspiration and a couple ideas to start getting out and exploring the world of VCV Rack and modular synths. It's a ton of fun, and it really is something that's worth checking out. Of course, if you want to see more modular synth or VCV tutorials here on the channel in the future, let me know down in the comments what you want to know about or learn about, and I'll see what I can do. Like I said, modular synthesis can get pretty complicated and pretty heady, so within reason, maybe we'll revisit this on the channel here in the future again at some point. With that, thank you for watching. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. And as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.